Alright, so this is something that usually flies under the radar for me just because of how absurd it is. But the more I think about it, it's actually pretty interesting. So we're going to be doing all of the Fate Stay Night servants against their masters. But the twist is that their masters are in their servant forms. So jumping right off into it, we have Muramasa versus Artoria. Pretty easy matchup, right? Saber has Avalon, she has Excalibur. It would be an obvious sweep. Not exactly. Muramasa, and we're going to be using his modified version specifically, only makes it fair. He has two gods in him, that being the Norse god Hodor and Susano. That automatically puts him above several other servants. So while it may seem like she might just come in and scoop up the win easy, that's not the case. It would really be a true deal fight, which is completely fine because Artoria is one of the few servants that's god level without actually being divine herself. Now for Shiro, we know that Shiro is a great fighter. He's an exceptional fighter. If EMIYA is anything to go by, if Sparks Line are high, where Shiro as a human actually defeated Salter, but his body timed out on him is anything to go by, if Prisma Illya is anything to go by, we know that he soloed an entire Grail War by himself with just a class card. One thing that I never see people bring up is how young he was when he did it. This dude was like 17 and won an entire war by himself. So that just goes to show you how he's more than capable of taking it if he's given the proper training and resources. Artoria, on the other hand, has never really been given a proper showcase in sword skill, which is extremely unfair to her considering who she is. She is King Arthur. She should at the very least be far above average, but unfortunately she does have to play her role. So by the book, he has her up on skill. It would be more like a Lancelot situation. So what may have seemed like her just running through him, now she's on the defense. Now she has to rely on her power, and this is where Excalibur comes in. Excalibur, of course, one of the strongest weapons in the verse. Muramasa doesn't have anything for defense. All he has is a really strong offense. He will not survive a hit from Excalibur in any way. So if Saber manages to get off Excalibur or land a hit, it's over. She wins. The thing about that is, and I've mentioned this before, Excalibur at its highest scale has an extremely large charge time. And I'm seeing people over in the thread that's covering this video saying, oh, well, you know, Saber would win. She would just Excalibur blast the entire city. First of all, he's not gonna let her do that. The only reason she did such a large scale against Jill's horror is because she absolutely had to. But the amount of time that it would genuinely take Saber to get that off, nobody is gonna let her do that. Even in Ataraxia, where she does actually nuke the city, it's because she was going against the Shades, who really couldn't do anything to stop her. Now, what she might do is release a low scale Excalibur that allows her to quick charge. Now, she has been shown doing that. You know, when she was chasing down Iskander, she chased him all the way down, and in a matter of seconds she had minced his entire chariot, which is a noble phantasm, after he had been using it the entire story. And he just barely got away from that. He just barely made it to that fight with Gil, because if he didn't get out the way, it would have been over with. Now for Iskander's case, I feel like it was much easier for him to get rid of the chariot altogether, because the chariot can only go so fast and he can only react so fast. So in that moment, it was just better for him to leave it behind. In Muramasa's case, it would be a matter of him falling in line with her shot, which is still very dangerous because we know that it takes a lot of energy. She doesn't have that many reserves to just keep spamming Excalibur. She's not Richard. She's not Salter. So what I feel like would be the most reasonable and the most realistic option is what she did to Gil in the Fate route. You know, she doesn't have to shoot the blast. She can also harness the blast into an actual strike. And I feel like that is what she would have to use to take down Muramasa, because it's not like you can't just get out the way of the blast. I mean, Iskander was able to get out the way at point blank range, and he has a D rank in agility. So for all the people that I know are gonna come in and be like, well, why would she put herself in range? That's so dumb. Just beam spam. Because she can miss, my brother. And it's canon that she has missed against a servant of the same speed. Muramasa also has D rank agility. So what do you think he's gonna do? But going over to her final trump card, we have her Avalon, flat out stated to be capable of blocking pretty much anything at all. And I do mean anything at all. This includes all outside interferences up to the 6th dimension. So if she pulls out Avalon, he can't do anything to her. Usually when we talk about Avalon, we're talking about her not being able to be harmed in terms of power. Well, in Muramasa's case, it's a very unique one because his sword can cut through concepts, and the basis of Avalon is conceptual. So if anybody would be able to get through Avalon's defense, it would definitely be him. The whole point of Avalon, what it's doing is temporarily bringing her to the land of Avalon itself, nullifying anything that's around her and making her invulnerable. Muramasa's sword, his phantasm, can cut through fate, karma, and destiny, but most importantly, it can cut through time and space. We know this from the story. The Shimosa chapter, he cut through Amakusa's entire reality marble, which is a completely different dimension, and that was before he was amped up by 2 gods. Now he's even stronger. You see where I'm going? In theory, he could cut through that space that's protecting her and he would kill her. And what makes it even worse is that in the story, she's had a problem where she struggled with people that can manipulate space-time. She had it with Sasuke, where he was doing true magic with his sword. But Muramasa could only pull that off in theory. Here's the problem with that. And this is as far as that goes. It's been outright stated in the description of Avalon that it can block true magic. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's true magic or something that's true magic level, it will be negated. And this doesn't even add the fact that it heals her wounds, which doesn't even really matter anyway because we're going for one-shots, but that's a thing too. Now, the energy used for Avalon has always been pretty ambiguous. A lot of people think that it drains her energy heavy. A lot of people think it doesn't drain her energy at all. From what's been portrayed, things like healing herself or healing somebody else does come at a cost, but the act of bringing her to Avalon itself, that costs her nothing. The only real drawback is that she's never been shown to use it and then do something else at the same time. So if she's using it, she has to commit to using it and nothing else. And then she does whatever she's gonna do. And this is why she is crowned as one of the strongest inherently, because there's only so many servants that even reach that level. And even when they get there, they can't do anything to her. So even if he could cut through it, by law, it simply wouldn't be strong enough because of Avalon's effect. We've seen him hang with a servant that can take down 200 other servants, but when it comes to fighting against an entity of this level, it's been outright shown that he can't hold a candle to it. So in this bout, he loses. Even if he were to get rid of Excalibur, and I've mentioned this before in the Fate Zero novel, that if she doesn't have access to both hands, she can't use her phantasm. Even if he got rid of her phantasm, Muramasa can only use his 3 times before the foundations of his spirit starts to break down. So he would still lose, just off the weight gain. There is the fact that she loses access to half her power because of the seals, but that doesn't really matter too much considering that it's gonna have to be a one-shot anyway. All she needs is enough energy to take him down, and half of the seals is more than enough to get the job done, so that's fine. Muramasa even has the skill God Slayer at EX, which makes it easier for him to fight against deities without consuming that much energy. Luckily for her, she's not an actual god, she's just at that level. Otherwise, there could be even more of an argument. I will say that there's more bouts in her favor, so I'm gonna give the win to her, but it's definitely a way better fight than you might think looking at it. Way better. For the next fight, we have EMIYA versus Space Ishtar. What? This is from the thread, by the way. I don't know what this guy was on when he made this, but Space Ishtar will vanquish EMIYA and send him to the Shadow Realm. I wouldn't even entertain this discussion. So I'm gonna do something more reasonable, and that's Ishtar versus EMIYA. So for Ishtar, we know is a god, but she's also a pseudo-servant, so she's thresholded. And EMIYA, we know, is capable of handling gods, so it's a lot more fair. Considering how he took 6 of Herc's lives, we already know that he can take her down. That's not even a question. The question is, how is he gonna do it? It's a situation that's very similar to the first fight, where he's more skilled overall, but she's ridiculously stronger than him off rip. And one big difference between Artoria and Ishtar is that Artoria had Excalibur. Excalibur is a blast. You know, it fires straight, it's linear. So if you miss it, you miss it. Ishtar, on the other hand, she doesn't even shoot her phantasm from the ground. That's another thing that he has to deal with. She can fly, but Ishtar doesn't even shoot her phantasm from the ground. She goes up into the sky. It has wide coverage and it has tracking. So he can't let her shoot that. He actually can't let her get that off. It's nearly impossible that she would actually miss. Now for the flying thing, we have seen that that's not an issue for him. You know, Medea tried to fly against him and he shot multiple arrows and nearly killed her through her defenses, by the way, with just residual damage. And that's despite how strong she is. So even though she can fly, that's not something that will stop him in particular. She has her gems, she has her bolt of heaven for attack and defense, and she has Ren's Gander bullets at a heightened level. EMIYA has Roias, but he has to still be careful because it takes a lot out of him. This one is pretty straightforward. If he doesn't allow her to get her phantasm off, he wins. But if he does, he definitely dies. So I'll say this is more of a tie just because, again, it could go both ways. Now there's two more scenarios that I want to point out. One is that she has nothing to deal with him up close. And this is pretty null and void because she can fly, but in the event that he does get close, there's nothing that she can do about it. He's just a better close range fighter. So he has her up on that. The second one is him getting his reality marble off and summoning UB-Dub. Now we already know that once he gains territorial advantage, EMIYA becomes a completely different servant. And for her, it's no different. Once he gets her inside his reality marble, he can sword spam, he can produce whatever he wants, he can produce even faster than he was before. Meanwhile, you have her who at that point she would only have her phantasm, which again, going back to the charge times, is gonna take way too long to do anything about it. She loses. That's a big thing that a lot of people forget about, the charge times. Even when Ishtar did use her phantasm, it took a long time for her to resort to it, and it took her a long time to pull it off. Meanwhile, we already know that EMIYA can instantly get off his UB-Dub. And I know it sounds crazy, but he's just that type of servant. He's a specialized servant. He has more bouts in his favor, so I would have to give him the win overall. Next, we got Bazett versus Cú Chulainn. Now this is an interesting one just off their background in Ataraxia alone. We already know that Bazett is a top tier fighter. She's one of the top people enlisted by the clock tower to hunt down mages, and we already know from Ataraxia she's actually killed Cú and Artoria in the story. Using her phantasm Froggerot, she was able to snipe Saber and she had a double KO with Cú, and that was before she became a servant. So it's not a matter of if she can pull it off, she already did. Now she's a pseudo servant attached to the Celtic sea god Manannán. In Cú's case, unfortunately, it's canon that he has an issue with ranged attacks from certain people, and that's despite having his skill protection from arrows. You know, he had his fight with Gilgamesh, and although he did survive for 12 hours, ultimately he's the one that still lost. Bazett in this form specializes in ranged water attacks on top of having her Froggerot. Now he's in a position where he has to use his runes, and if you're going off of Heaven's Field, when he's getting overwhelmed like that, it has been shown that it might put him in a scenario where he will lose. On top of that, she has access to ancient runes too. Any other scenario would be more so of it going both ways, him using Gaebog or her using Froggerot. She still has more bouts in her favor, she wins. Next we got Atrium versus Medea. Atrium being her original master before she got with Kazuki. This one is pretty easy considering how things went down. There's really nothing to guess here. Medea is the one that truly took Atrium down before the story kicked off. Even if we were to entertain the idea of him using her class card, it would just be her fighting against a weaker and a less effective version of herself. He lacks the power, he lacks the spells, and he lacks her tools. He's also one of the many people that Shiro beat in Prisma Illya during his war. It's a sweep. Then we got Kama versus Medusa. Very unfortunate on Medusa's behalf. It's not nearly as bad as Space Tar versus EMIYA, but it's still pretty rough. Everything is in Kama's favor. Medusa isn't strong enough. Her speed, which is one of Medusa's only assets, really doesn't matter here because Kama is conceptual. It's not gonna be a matter of how fast she is. That's not gonna do anything for her here. And then you have her phantasm, Bellerophon. Now, while Bellerophon is pretty powerful, it's not really gonna do anything to Kama. And if it does do anything to Kama, it's not gonna kill her. Medusa's gonna drain all of her energy, and then she's gonna die. And that's if she's able to even hit her with Bellerophon. You know, when she hit Salter, Salter was being distracted by Shiro. She has no help this time. And when she went against Saber, Saber was able to dodge Pegasus multiple times with nowhere to run before she finally just shot her down out of the sky. Kama's magical resistance is A rank, which is higher than Salter and EMIYA's. She couldn't even turn her to stone if she wanted to. Even if I were to cheat a little bit and use Gorgon, she would still lose. She'd just lose better. So I'm gonna have to give Kama the win on this one. We got Prime Zouken versus Cursed Arm Hassan. Now this is the hardest one by far to me, simply because we don't know much about Prime Zouken. There's a lot of obscurity surrounding his name. We do know that he helped take down the mages at the clock tower in London, but that's as far as that goes. I'm seeing someone in the thread say Prime Zouken at best would maybe win against Cursed Arm. Honestly, since we don't know anything about him, Prime Zouken would actually be a downgrade, right? Because when you think about it, this is Zouken before he became immortal. So you're putting him in a position where he can be killed. Whereas if we use the Zouken right now, that wouldn't be the case. So I'm gonna use the Zouken right now instead, and I'm gonna use his Heaven's Field version. In a fight against Hassan, his main aim is stalling you out with his dirks and then using Zabania to take your heart out. Zouken has no heart. His body is made of worms, and conceptually his phantasm wouldn't work just like against Kirei, because in order to get rid of Zouken, you would have to just take down the core worm. So he can't kill Zouken. So now it becomes a matter of, well, how does Zouken take him down? Well, if it's Heaven's Field Zouken, he has access to Medea's corpse. Medea's corpse has access to her magecraft, and if you remember the puppet using these spells, he could easily use one of its large-scale attacks to mow down Hassan. Now you gotta give credit, Hassan is one of, if not the most evasive servant out of all of them. Cú had an extremely hard time just keeping up with him in Heaven's Field, but that's only at close range. At far range, Cursed Arm has just as much problems as anybody else, and Medea specializes in far range. Crazy as it might seem, Zouken wins. Next we have Kirei versus Gilgamesh, the dream team, the only team, now pit against each other. You hate to see it. Alright, so in Kirei's case, he has been attached to 3 spirits, that being Rasputin, the moon spirit Balu, and an evil spirit Zahak. And due to him being attached to Zahak specifically, he can now manifest the powers of Angra Mainyu. Now we know from the story that Gilgamesh has a natural resistance from Angra Mainyu's mud. It would take 3 times as much mud to affect him versus anybody else. Not to mention when he got ate by Sakura, he was the only person that was capable of busting out. From the Fate route, we've seen the way that Kirei can maneuver and actually manipulate this mud in his favor when he was fighting against Shiro. Due to it being an independent existence and something that can operate on its own, you could argue that the mud can be used as a defense against Gil's Gate of Babylon. We've already seen that no matter how much Gilgamesh spams his gate, there are times where it can be matched, like EMIYA or Shiro, or it can be flat out negated, like Heracles using his pelt. So if we were to consider that Kirei's mud would just consume all of the weapons that are being shot from the gate, well then Gilgamesh has to find a way to get in on him close range or surprise him. Now one of the things that come to mind, I know Gilgamesh has a scythe that can warp space. He could warp space and then decapitate Kirei, or warp space and find a way to pierce him in the core. That would be one of his best options. In that light, Gilgamesh wins. If he can't do this, we all know how Kirei is coming in terms of close range combat. Gil is not holding a candle to Kirei in close range combat. As a human, now he's a servant with several spirits attached to him. It's even worse. So in the event that he closes in on Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh is getting bodied. We already know from Da Vinci's death that he doesn't even need a weapon to do this. He can pierce a servant's spiritual core with his bare hands and take them down. We know that Gilgamesh has trouble at close range from several events, whether it be him going against Artoria, him going against Shiro, him going against Herc. He was terrified of the idea of Herc getting in because he already knew what was going to happen. It would be that same scenario with Kirei. In that light, Kirei would actually be the one that comes out on top. Here's another scenario. If Kirei's phantasm is strong enough to straight up take out Gilgamesh on its own and just swallow him whole even with his resistance, that will be another win for Kirei. Because again, you have to consider that his resistance is technically a retcon. Kirei is now being amped up by several spirits. It's not the same. Likewise, if the mud isn't fast enough to protect Kirei and doesn't act as a shield, then Gilgamesh would just straight up snipe him, and then the win would go to him. And for our final scenario, and this is probably the one that everybody's been considering from the start, is if Gil just goes all out and minces Kirei to shreds by any means necessary. He has Aya, so that would take him down. He has fire, lightning, and ice. He has physical shields and magical shields and lightning speed defense systems to stop him from even getting in. He has his ship, Vamana, which can also go faster than anything that Kirei has available to him. He has nukes. It would be a scrape. More wins in his favor, gotta give it to Gil. And last but not least, we have Prismaverse Illya versus Heracles. I'm already seeing people say that Csitonai would be a better fit for this, and normally that might be the case, but here, not so much. And I think this is just a lack of people not being into Prisma Illya, so they just don't know how broken Illya actually is. But let's entertain the idea that we did use Csitonai. Csitonai is Illya being attached to 3 spirits, Freya, Louhi, and Csitonai, all of them being recognized as goddesses. The thing about Csitonai is that she has to kill Herc with 12 different options. She has her arrow phantasm, her polar bear, her ice manipulations, her Herc summon, her sword. Eventually she's going to run out, and then she's going to lose. Prisma Illya, on the other hand, can just one-shot Herc. She's just that strong, and that's the difference. She doesn't have to worry about doing 12 different attacks because she can just do a 12 live hit, similar to Saber and Shiro with Caliburn when they took half his lives in the Fate route. How does she do this? That will be with the full force of the Kaleido Stick. He's not blocking this. He can't do anything about this, and the range of the attack is so large that he can't get out the way of it. Not only that, but unlike everything else that has a charge time, she can do this attack nearly instantly. She wins. This is before you add on her class cards. She's got the Saber card, the Berserker card. She has the composite Gorgon form. There's a lot of different ways that she could go against Heracles and it would still work out for her, even if that's just to stall him out. In the event that she doesn't get this off, he's too fast, she only has 1 life, he mows her down. Here's another scenario. Herc is another person that has problems with ranged attacks, at least in his Berserker form. If it's strong enough, he can't just power through the attack. It didn't help him against Salter. It didn't help him against Gil. She can already fly in her base form. She can fly in her Medea form. This too would give her enough time to stall to again go back to her full force blast and just take him down. If you try to bring up Shadow Herc, just make sure you bring up the whole thing. When she was going against Shadow Herc, she was still learning how to use her powers in the middle of the fight. She didn't have access to nearly as many forms as she did towards the end of the series, and not once did she use her full force blast. She didn't even know how to at the time. And to put it into perspective, she was able to not only rival but overpower Kid Gil's Aya when she went up against him. And if you know Kid Gil, you'll know there's no power reduction between him and his adult form. It's the same Gil. The only difference is he has access to less things because of it. More or less the outcome is about even. I gotta give him a tie.